One of the most common questions I get about managing anxiety and depression is about medication. Do I take medication to manage? I have in the past. I've had a couple of different medications. My experience has been they don't really work for me. I will list a bunch of resources, some of the books that I really like on this subject, so you can do a bit of reading, but I can't stress enough that this is absolutely a conversation to have with a medical professional. The whole origin of medication is based on the idea that depression and anxiety are caused by a chemical imbalance in your brain. And one of my very favorite authors on the subject, who is a psychiatrist and medical doctor out of the US, is Dr. David Burns. He was a huge proponent of kind of pushing away from medication. It was, I want to say it was the early 90s. He started doing more research on the research that had been done. And he was one of the early people to say, there's not actually a lot of evidence to support this idea that medication helps depression and anxiety. Plus, of course, he had his own patients, people he'd worked with over decades, who he, absolutely prescribed them antidepressants, as we call them, and didn't find that they really worked all that much. So that's, I will link to a couple of his books and his website. He has some really interesting research on that. But what really got me, it was a therapist I had after I was diagnosed with anxiety. She directed me to one of his books. And in the book, he talked about the placebo effect, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think if something is helping you feel better and getting you to a place where you can start some real healing, even if it's a placebo effect, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But he made the point of, he's supposed to be making decisions that are based in evidence. And if you were talking about having low energy and he asked you a few questions about your diet, he might come to the conclusion that there's a good chance that your iron is low. And so then what he would do after that is send you to get some blood testing done and to confirm whether or not that was true. And if the blood test confirmed it, then okay, he could give you prescription level iron and you'd be feeling better. But there's no test for chemical imbalance. And I've seen him do, videos. He has a podcast as well where he can get quite spicy about it. But he'll say, has anybody ever tested your brain chemistry? Has anybody ever taken fluid from your brain and tested it? And no, they haven't. It's not a testable theory, which that was such a shocking thing for me to read, because I absolutely was on the track of, yes, this is a chemical imbalance in my brain, and I take these medications and they write the chemicals and it's all good. So that was pretty interesting. And I think additional research since his early days looking into it has confirmed a lot of what he says, which is pretty interesting. Another book I really like from a professional in the field is, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And he was pretty early on. A lot of work he did early in his career was working with Vietnam veterans when they came home and trying to figure out why they were experiencing, violent, severe flashbacks. His background is all trauma research. And it was interesting because he said, initially when research started coming out about these new antidepressants, as we were calling them, and that was sort of the tone that he writes about it in. He said it was interesting because they were always meant to be prescribed along with some other sort of therapy modality. So the idea was to use the medication to take the edge off some of those extreme reactions that folks had, to be able to get to the core of what is their trauma, what is it that's causing so much severe stress in their systems. And he was not at all shy about his opinions on how overprescribed he thinks those medications are now, where we're also, particularly in children and young people, as an aside, but we're really not seeing people get better en masse, and yet prescriptions are as high as they've ever been. So that was a pretty interesting read too. I'll link to that one as well. If you decide to go the route of medication, it's been a while since I did it, but I think I remember being told it would take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks for the meds to really kick in and start working. And my experience was that I actually started feeling better within a week. And so it was very interesting later on to go back and read some of the research Dr. Burns had done, where he talked about placebo effect and how my experience was actually quite common. And the reason I felt better is because I was finally doing something and somebody was listening and we were taking action. And so it was enough to say, okay, we're moving in the right direction. And so something inside my brain and body went, all right, great, we're doing this. So you're going to feel better now. And I thought it was really interesting. What I found after that was maybe after about a month or two, that effect dropped. Suddenly the medication just didn't really work anymore. We tried upping dosages. I played with a few different things over time, but ultimately it didn't make a lot of difference for me. That being said, I know plenty of people who swear by their medications, find them very helpful. And certainly, as I linked in another video talking about the upward spiral, that's just one of the many different things you can do. So for some people, it's absolutely a lifeline. For me, it was never that helpful. And your experience is going to be whatever it is. One other resource I'm going to link to in the comments, it's actually to a TED Talk, but you can buy the book as well. It's the TED Talk is delivered by Johann Hari, who's an author and journalist. And the book he published, I want to say it's about 4 or 5 years old now. It's called Lost Connections. And he looks at the origins of depression, talking about his own experience with it, as well as, going to different parts of the world and seeing what other folks do about depression in different cultures. And similarly, kind of taking that spin of, I've been on medication and it never really did anything for me, and I'm not sure why. So that was why I went on this journey. The TED Talk is a really great primer on the book. So it's like the 18-minute version if you don't want to read the whole book, but the book itself was actually a pretty good read as well. Absolutely worth repeating. This is a conversation to have with a doctor or a medical professional of some kind. If you are interested in seeing if you can manage your situation with medication, that's who you need to have that conversation with. And I can't stress that enough. And, it's really, all of this for me has always been a bit of a science experiment. Check something out, see if it works. If it doesn't, adjust, change, try something different, introduce, take away. It's an ongoing process. And you'll probably find if you go this route that that's how it works for you too. So that's my experience with medication. As always, any comments are welcome. Questions are welcome. Feel free to share and ask questions. And I will see you next time.